Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 322. And we've got a new guest, somebody who we haven't had on before, and a new topic that I'm anxious to get into. But we will get into that in a minute. First, what we're going to do is we're going to do what we always do. We'll kind of go around the room and kind of introduce ourselves, talk about anything we have going on, anything we want to promote. So since you were on my channel, I'll kick it off. You can find my YouTube stuff here on this channel. And also, while you're here, check out Making Comics 101. It's a series that I did. I think there's about 70-something videos in all. And it's basically everything you want to know about how to make a comic from start to finish. Everything from coming up with your idea, all the way to printing, publishing, every step in between. And you can either watch it all the way through, or you can just pick and choose what you want. You're like, I want to know about inking, or I want to know about making a pitch, pitching, or whatever it is having to do with comics. Definitely check that out. There's a playlist for that. Also, I updated the playlist for the Artcasters. So because the Artcasters kind of it's on all three of our channels back and forth. If you want to go to my channel, I don't know if you guys have playlists updated, but if you go to mine, you could, if you had like, I don't know how many hours, like
a year,
over a year to spend, you could sit there and start with episode 1 and go all the way through. Other than that, if you are local to Arizona, Free Comic Book Day is coming up this weekend, Saturday. I will be at Surprise Comics. I'll be signing, I'll be sketching, and you come down there, meet me. I can do sketches or whatever, remarks, all that kind of stuff, or you just go in and get some free comics. I'm going to be doing that myself. So I'm looking forward to that, as I do every year. So definitely check me out. I'll be at Surprise Comics. Other than that, you can find me on my website at circworks.com. I've got tons of digital products for making comics and a bunch of other cool stuff. So check that out. All right, Josh, what about you?
Awesome. As usual, I have a book coming out in June. On June 7th, called Jacob's Apartment from Graphic Mundi. It should be available at bookstores everywhere, but one thing you can do is go to your local Barnes & Noble or box chain store or local bookstore or any bookstore and ask them to order Jacob's Apartment from Graphic Mundi. It's a doomed romance comic in the vein of Ghost World or Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind that kind of talks about dealing with grief, young love, and also like weird interweaving dreams where characters start appearing as their childhood stuffed animals. A lot of really fun stuff like that. 138 full color pages. I encourage you guys to get that. And then, as usual, also there's my graphic novel 2 Stories, which is my comic about faith and mental illness and my journey dealing with depression, as well as the weird hypocrisy of Christian schools. And also cosplaying as Indiana Jones for an entire year at school before cosplay was even a word, which shows you what a nerd I was. So yeah, if you're into like autobio comics, I know. If you're into like autobio comics, like Hate, 8-Ball, American Splendor, that kind of thing, this would be a good book to pick up today from Amazon. And then the last thing is, if you're in Toronto, and you're planning, or you're in like New York or Michigan, or like planning on attending Toronto Comics Festival CCAF, I'll be there at the Graphic Mundi booth, and I'm really excited about that. So, especially if you're in Canada, I would love to meet some Canadian peeps, some Artcasters from Canada. I know there's one person who listens to my stream who will probably meet up with me one of those days. But I want to meet more of you guys, or East Coasters. So yeah, that'll do it. Sorry, that I have my record for like the longest, most awkward is.
Well, it also doesn't hurt that you've got like 3 graphic novels you're promoting.
yeah, exactly. I know. I could go on about the one I'm doing now. But anyhow, speaking of graphic novels, there is a guy who's working on some comics as we speak, and I'm really excited about the fact that Mr. Kerr is working on some comics. Corey, where can everybody find your stuff and see your progress?
You can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. If you go to CoreyKerr.com/online, or you go to the website and just click on what's new, then you can see Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and whatever else. Yeah, I jumped back into comics. I'm posting some very slow progress. I'm still wrapping up my animated short with just the tiniest bit of live action, and honestly, I think the world doesn't want it to happen because it's still snowing.
Mhm.
I'm like, come on! Every time we go to shoot, we get snowed out, and it is anyway. So we've got
It's
about
95 here.
Yeah, it sounds like you
Yeah.
have to justify either a trip to Arizona or California again. I think your employer just has to
Yeah.
back you up on that.
Yeah, that would be great. But anyway, I'm about half shot on the live action stuff, so we got a little bit of a shot.
Oh, good.
But I was hoping to have that done now, but it'll be done in the next week or two, I imagine. But yeah, in the meantime, you can watch weird animations about existential crisis that happen when you think too much about what happens with the robot apocalypse, or if the Matrix is going to happen, there are going to be batteries, or if if the Armageddon is going to come through like the Terminators, where we have like Boston Dynamics armed robots policing the streets of New York. If you just want to laugh about Congress being a total and complete joke, you can see cartoons that I have about turning them all into battling robots instead of actually voting entities. There's lots of there's lots of fun stuff. Fun for all.
Yeah.
I love it.
In the animation page on my website.
I love
Speaking of the Matrix, just little side note. I saw everywhere all at once this weekend. It is awesome. Definitely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Okay.
It's like one of the most original movies I think I've seen. Even though it does kind of have a little bit of that kind of Matrixy feel, but it's like with so many sequels and all that. It was nice, something original.
Nice.
But,
I saw it a couple weeks ago, and
Did you?
it was one of those movies that it's April right now, but I already know it's going to be my favorite movie of the year.
I know it's so
that good.
So anyway, well, since Brandon comes in here, let's meet Brandon. Grew up. You can find him at Dismay Comics on Facebook, and he's got a Kickstarter that is live right now. There is a link in the description of that Kickstarter. So I'll let Brandon talk about what he's Kickstarting. How would you say how you're Kickstarting? Yeah, Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Kickstarting.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Brandon.
So yeah, I'm Brandon. I'm the writer, the creator of the Gallows Man. As you can see on this screen, I look like a shady anime character because of the blue on my glasses. I tried adjusting the light. That didn't work. So yeah, I'm not doing anything shady. There's no crazy plan or whatever, people. Also, it looks like I'm in like a hideout, like a villain base or something, undisclosed location.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
You're secretly
around
trying
there,
to bring about all of humanity into one consciousness.
Yeah. I do feel like to really fit the anime thing, you should be in like a corporate boardroom with a lot of reflective surfaces.
Oh, yeah.
That are then reflecting off the reflection of your glasses.
And I need to consciously every like 10 seconds go like this, like push my glasses up like that. But the Gallows Man, it's a Kickstarter going on right now. I've got the first book. I've got both covers, the variant and the regular cover. The Kickstarter is going right now for both issues 1 and 2. So if you've read issue 1, there's stuff where you can just dive into issue 2, tiers for issue 2. If you haven't read any of it, there's a bunch of tiers for just jumping into it, catching up. There's some catch-up tiers and stuff, and there's tiers ranging for all budgets, because I understand right now money is tough. We're all budgeting. Gas is expensive. Groceries are expensive. I spent nearly $100 on 3 bags of groceries the other day. I understand. There's reward tiers ranging from $1 to $70. So there's a reward tier for any budget, and any and every bit helps. A little synopsis, teeny brief synopsis of the series. It's basically, it's set in the 1940s. It's set in the 1940s in a satirically over-the-top and campy world of superheroes. And the Gallows Man, the superhero, and his team, they have to take out this Nazi threat that has infiltrated their city, not only to save the city, but to avenge the death of the Gallows Man's former mentor. And the best way to describe the book tonally is take the 1960s Batman show, the Adam West show, take its fun campiness, and then just mix in some Tarantino level violence, and you have the Gallows Man.
Nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what we're into today as far as the topic, as far as dark humor, and it's really, I think it's a part of that is just flipping things kind of on their, flipping things over it, like things you just wouldn't, because that I guess dichotomy between like that campiness and top. I recently watched a YouTube video. I forgot what it's called, but these special effects are, and they'll take a scene and they'll do something crazy with it. But they basically took the Adam West Batman and they put him in the Batman movie. And
Corridor Digital. Yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just like it was so great. So I mean, I was kind of, because I knew we were going to have you on, I was kind of thinking of the Gallows Man when you did that, because it's taking characters that shouldn't be in the world, and I love that stuff. I mean, I'm a big fan of dark humor. Right now, I think I don't get to watch much stuff, but the big one, I mean, one of my favorite now, it hasn't back yet, but is What We Do in the Shadows. I don't know if you ever watched that, but it's very definitely that dark humor. There's a lot of crazy violence and stuff, and I love that stuff. And another one that was new, I think it came out in the past year or so, is Only Murder. I don't know if you saw that one. What
was it called again?
Short. It's Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez, and they just live in this. It's this big, kind of a little bit ritzy, like apartment complex, and then there's a murder there, but they're doing a podcast, and as they're doing the podcast.
Okay, yeah. I remember seeing the ads for it. Yeah.
It's pretty good. So
Hey,
I am
Scott,
definitely
Scott. I don't know if you're roboting out for Corey. I'd want to check with Corey. Corey, are you hearing Scott robot out a little bit, or is that my bad connection?
No, that's
I hear him a little bit doing that.
Is it me? Okay, let me check. Sometimes my headphones.
Sorry, I think it's partially like, even when you said the movie name, like I felt really bad for Brandon, because you're like, have you seen? I mean, it's a really great movie. It's just
okay.
Like, yeah. So
all right. Well, let me know if it continues. I'm not sure what the cause of that is. So
no worries.
Well, Scott's figuring that out. He was talking about Only Murders in the Building with Martin Short and Steve.
Nice.
Martin.
Exactly. So. But anyways, so I'm curious. Because and I mean, I'm a lot older than you, but I still, I mean, it wasn't new when I watched it, but the '60s Batman series. But kind of, I assume, how did you get into that as far as inspirational? To get inspired by that.
Well, when it actually came to like writing the script for the Gallows Man. At the time when I wrote the script, I hadn't seen a single episode of the 1960s Batman show. It was mostly just like pop culture osmosis of like the gifs of him running around with the bomb, or them like climbing up the building and stuff, as well as like just knowing like the and this was kind of the antithesis of how eventually the Gallows Man came about, was like, in the show, they will beat up bad guys. They'll punch bad guys, but before the punch contacts, before you actually see contact, it's bam, or wham. Right. You don't literally see the contact of the punch. Yeah. And so with the Gallows Man, I should also mention, with the Batman show, you don't see the contact, and then you'll see the aftermath, but it's like there's no bloody noses or anything, because it is ultimately it's open for all ages to watch. But with the Gallows Man, I was kind of like, okay, what if you took that? You can have the BAMs and the PALs every now and then, maybe not see contact all the time. And then once you do the next panel, you see like a neck broken, or you see like blood or guts or whatever, like kind of just hyperizing that little thing that they had going on in the 1960s Batman show.
So So I have a question. So it seems like there's kind of two ways that you could have approached, because you're the writer, you've got an artist on your team. It seems like there's a couple different ways you could have approached it. You can go cartoony, which looks kind of like the way you went, or you could almost go serious, like more of a, like, I don't know, more maybe even like a Marvel style or something like that. But because I one of the things that I think when I think of dark humor, sometimes it helps. And I mean, I think what I've seen in the pages and everything you guys have up, you definitely come across this way, is that the main characters, they have to be taken it seriously. You have to have the straight man, you have to have somebody that's they're not for laugh. I mean, they're so. But I could totally see, like, a good example would be somebody like a Leslie Nielsen in like either Airplane or whatever. I mean, he plays it totally straight, but it's just hilarious the way they do it. So the fact that your hero is just kind of like, it's a serious thing, but just the situation is so ridiculous, and the language and there's everything they use. So I guess what made you decide to go with more of the kind of humorous visuals?
It was kind of just like, especially with the humor, I went with it because there's no language, there's no suggestive themes, there's no alcohol or smoking within the miniseries, but it is a rated M book, ultimately for violence and gore, even though, like you had mentioned, we went with a little bit more cartoony look to it, because you had said you can go kind of the more Marvel-esque art style or cartoony. And I felt with the humor, when you do have like some kind of serious moments within it, it doesn't feel like a giant juxtaposition. If the art style is a little bit more cartoony, it all feels cohesive. If this random pun joke, this random like noose joke or hanging joke or whatever happens, it doesn't feel too far from some crazy serious thing that could happen.
And that's also, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, it's also it's funny because a lot of, if you ever have seen like almost like an Itchy and Scratchy or something, like where it is more like cartoony or humor, and you see that ultra violence, and it almost adds to that, where it's like, oh, whoa, this, if it's the first time watching, like, oh, I'm expecting that, versus you kind of get that. I don't know if you've seen like the Invincible series. It's a little more kind of serious, like as far as the look, but it goes way ultra violent, because it just because it's animated, you may not expect that either. But yeah, there's just, I guess, a number of different ways. So I'm curious. So you said there's like really no language or smoking or anything like that. So you decide kind of, you just kind of draw the line, because if you're going to go ultra violent, you could just go that way with everything. So I'm just wondering what your process was as far as, setting up certain perimeters, as far as, I don't necessarily want to go this, but definitely with the violence, kind of go all out and everything.
It kind of was with, because there's multiple influences when it comes to something like the Gallows Man, but it kind of was just seeing like how that Adam West show was, because there's no language in the Adam West show. There's really no sexual, not too much sexuality.
Right.
There's from what I remember, not really much alcohol or smoking. You did have the penguin smoking.
Right.
But it was just kind of that, where it's that, but then it's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I only want to have like one of those things be introduced into that like family friendly environment. But if I introduce one of those, I kind of, by the end of the series, by like issues 3 or 4, be able to go like balls to the wall with that element. And kind of, it sounds bad. Violence was kind of the best way to do that of the ones I could choose.
I think that makes it funnier. Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a humor, like, because to me, if it were just like it's Adam West Batman, but dark. Like that would be kind of boring.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're like kind of on the nose doing that style with the corniness, the sound effects, everything, the only difference is like maybe after a punch, somebody's like head is disemboweled or something, you know, like it's like, I think that is I think that does make it funny. And I think that might be the hard thing with like dark humor. I love dark humor. I love horror comics too. And I just had somebody send me a horror comic, like from my old school, because one of his instructors is one of my friends with me, and he suggested I read it. I still haven't checked it out, and I'm a little nervous to check it out because it's supposed to be a horror comic, and I'm a guy who, like, if you're gonna go gory in horror, like go gory in horror, like lean into it 100%. Dark humor is weird too, where it's like. It's hard to find like a really good balance, I would imagine, where if you go like too overall dark, it might come across as like either generic or like just not even really. It can come off as
like edgy.
Like just like an edgy thing. Yeah. But if you also go like too light, it can seem really tame and kind of like not really dark humor. It's like this. There's this like line where, okay, what's when I think of dark humor, I think of like the analogy of like the difference between tragedy and comedy, right? Where it's like a comedy is like you see a guy walking down the street, he doesn't see that the manhole of a sewer is open and he falls in it. That's comedy, right? Tragedy is you show the aftermath of the sewer, right? Dark humor is you show the aftermath of the sewer and maybe you zoom in on the aftermath of the sewer and then you spend way too long showing the aftermath of the sewer. So it goes from tragedy to comedy again. Like it kind of brings it back to the I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what it kind of sounds like you're doing.
No, I think that's spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you navigate that, like that kind of fine line, and try to kind of maintain the humor and also pushing the line, but like not like how do you find the line for that?
It's ultimately like I'm not saying like this is what people should just be doing and this isn't what I was just doing, but like watching movies that have dark humor in it or reading comics with dark humor or reading books with dark humor, because it can then help you in like understanding like kind of how to approach that type of comedy. Yeah, as well as when you're reading those, you can see examples of good dark humor or you can see examples of not so good dark humor, like the stuff where it's like this clearly feels like the person's trying to be edgy or they're trying to get a reaction or something out of people. And just kind of seeing those elements and be like, okay, I'll start crafting my way. I'll avoid the things that I saw as in my head mistakes and just start crafting the story in that way. There's ultimately, like you said, what you hit the nail on the coffin with, or not nail on the coffin.
No, that was the dark humor version of nail on the head.
Yeah, exactly. Well, with that, this was actually what I was going with, is like a lot of dark humor has that morbid sense to it. There's, I mean, in our lives, like there's so much just like awful or dark crap to it, but sometimes if you look at it in a different perspective, you can see some humor in that. Right. That thing that happened to you 10 years ago. When it happened 10 years ago, you were upset. You hated that thing that happened to you. You're looking back on it 10 years later with a new perspective, a new pair of glasses, and you can kind of see, I was taking it a little bit too seriously, or I still feel that way a little bit, but I can still see some humor or some lightness to that situation.
I think that's the key to, at least for me, getting through difficult things is laughing through difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
So for example, these guys and a few others that are kind of in the community used to make fun of me all the time because I'm always in I'm always telling situations where I almost died. And then recently I like punctured a lung and broke 7 ribs and my collarbone in 2 places in a motorcycle accident. And immediately everyone stopped making those jokes. And I was like, nope, you guys need to make those jokes. Like this is funny. It hurts a whole heck of a lot right now and I can't breathe real well, but it's hilarious that this happened, you know? And because I remember Scott even said like, oh, now I kind of feel kind of uncomfortable. I'm like, oh no, please continue. Like that's how I'm going to get through this.
Which, by the way, like the second we had kind of the go ahead, then Jim Lujan is like, and Gary are like sending pictures of like guys doing jumps and stuff to him, and just being like, "This is Corey." Yeah, and like jet ski accidents, and I don't know. It's I was even telling Corey to be careful. He like recently went kayaking, and I was like, you know, that'll be the one time that there's like sharks in the water. Ironically, without like missing a beat. And again, this if I were retelling this would be the dark humor thing. He's like, oh yeah, somebody actually did die when I was out in the water from a shark attack. And then what do you know? There's like a news article, and it's somebody who was kayaking in the same area.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was the
Guy's
first
got
time
the worst luck.
I've surfed Morro Bay hundreds of times, but the first time I took a kayak out in Morro Bay, somebody was eaten by a great white shark that day.
So don't kayak near Corey. I'm just saying, guys.
I'm always at least okay, you know. I don't leave unscathed, but
So if anyone is in any form of vehicle, do not be near you, basically.
Yeah,
well, my argument is if you're in my vehicle, you're probably going to be fine.
that's
Okay.
true.
Whatever that vehicle is.
That's a fair point. I think like so the dark humor thing. It's like I think of like now I'm blanking out on the name of the book, but it's like Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman wrote like a series that ended up being turned into like a TV series
Good Omens.
that was about the apocalypse. And
Corey said it. Good
oh,
Omens. Good
oh,
Omens.
Good Omens. Yeah.
No.
And it's like super dark humor. It's and I think this is another thing about dark humor that maybe you can touch on, Brandon. But like one of this kind of ridiculous premise where it's like, okay, we're gonna do like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but like try to make them like more kind of relatable and believable as like as actual people in this, and also like famine is going to be like a popular diet that kind of just starts killing off people because they start starving themselves to death. And like it's got like a total satire element to it, but they also take it super seriously. So it's like there's that element too, where I think to kind of pull off the humor, you kind of have to like lean in and go full bore with it and like treat your characters with like dignity and respect, even though they're these absurd characters. How do you kind of approach character in dark humor and kind of dancing that line where like you obviously can't take them too seriously, but you also can't take them too lightly, right? Because you need people to still feel invested in the stakes of the story. How do you kind of balance that?
There kind of needs to be.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say there kind of needs to be like what you were like going towards. There needs to be a little bit of rules within your world, because if it is too absurd, then it's like, yes, you have a funny book, but if you have any story, I'm not following the narrative, or I'm not taking it seriously. I'm literally just reading it for that one joke or that scenario. But with like kind of that element, what you were talking about with like the 4 horsemen and kind of like bringing them down a little bit relatable and odd and goofy, what you don't normally see with them, that is how different forms of dark humor can be had. Because like in the Gallows Man, like there's an example of the main character, Gallows Man, his secret identity. He goes to work in the morning and he works at a funeral parlor, and there's all kinds of weird goofiness within that. And this is just like, no one says it or mentions it, but they go to like a roast beef shop, they get some food, they come back and they're like, all right, time to eat. And they're eating, they have their little roast beef tray in front of a corpse, like laid out, like they stopped working on fixing that corpse up, and they're just eating. Because also it kind of plays into that old timey sense of like, we don't really know sanitation. There's nothing wrong with this. Eating some fries with my tray sitting on the corpse or whatever, there's no problem with this. But so some people could see that as dark. You can definitely see that as absurd. But it's just like you got to sprinkle in some moments like that, but don't have the entire book or entire movie or entire show be that every second, because either it'll get old or stale after a little while, or you're just not caring about an actual story. It ultimately is just a sketch show or sketch pitches basically by that point.
Yeah, which can work on their own too. Like,
yeah.
You know, I when I was in high school, I was really obsessed with this very dark humor comic by Evan Dorkin, I think, called Milk and Cheese, and it was like the premise was like it was a carton of milk and a piece of cheese that just like started like anarchist riots like everywhere they went. And from what I recall, I mean, it's been a long time. I need to retouch base with that comic, but I think that was the premise every time, was like Milk and Cheese will go to like a grocery store and then they start a giant riot and there's Molotov cocktails being thrown everywhere. But it's like that same premise. From what I recall, it was just that same premise over and over again. That can be really funny. But again, I think if you're going to go that route, you got to like, I think with humor, you just kind of have to lean into it and like commit, you know?
I think, Brandon, one of the things you brought up, the absurdity, because you kind of have to take it to the absurd level.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it can be just like, oh, should I really be laughing at this? And sometimes dark humor is like that. But if you take it to that absurd level, then you know this isn't reality. It's way over the top. Like somebody that does dark humor pretty well in children's books is like Roald Dahl, who did like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, and and because like almost all of the protagonists in his movies, they're like victims of child abuse, really. But it just goes to this absurd level, you know, with the Trunch Bowl and all this stuff, and just the stuff that it's just like that. Okay, you know. If it was more realistic, then you're like, oh, I don't know if I can laugh at this. And I mean, that inspired obviously J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter and him living in a cupboard and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can take something like that that's a really serious thing, and these are children's books, but there is a level of dark humor to them.
But sorry, I want to throw in there too, just because you brought up Roald Dahl, Scott. He has some like dark humor short stories. Like there's a collection called Switch Bitch, pardon my language, but it's like, it is like, if you want to read just like dark humor and you want to see like the mind of the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory writer with like no holes barred, like it's like he's like just leaning into it and writing very adult stuff, like stuff that would have been like written for like, I think a lot of them were written for like Playboy or something. Yeah. But it's like they're so dark and hilarious and twisted. I encourage anyone watching this, check out Roald Dahl's adult material. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I've heard it. I haven't checked it out, but yeah.
Sorry, I just derailed that.
No. So yeah, but I mean, I think, and also I think a big level of, I mean, a big component of dark humor is that you're not punching down at people. So I mean, it's like you got to kind of punch up. So I mean, obviously the villains in your story are Nazis. Now, obviously that's I mean, they were obviously horrible, committed incredible atrocities and everything. But again, not making light of what they did, but basically poking fun at them, making them the villain. Well, they are the villains, you know what I mean? But putting them such a serious real world villain into this kind of campy, this campy situation and everything, and then your hero sort of dispatching them.
I mean, like an example of that's not even the Gallows Man is like Taika Waititi's movie Jojo Rabbit.
Oh yeah.
it has that poking fun at some literal stuff with the Nazis, like how they would say hey to each other.
Right.
Very absurd and over the top, but that's how they did it and stuff.
Yeah, he's a master of dark humor too. I mean, he's kind of
yeah.
one of the people behind What We Do in the Shadows. And
Yeah.
and I remember when that movie first came out, and even seeing the trailer, you're like, oh, what is he doing here? But you know, people make assumptions before you even know what it is, and then you go see it and like, okay, yeah. I mean, he handled it very well. And one of the things was it was just Hitler not being a real character, but in the mind of this kid, and how he and that character arc of him viewing him in a certain way in the beginning of the movie, and then realizing it, and then what ultimately how he kind of gets rid of him towards the end. I mean, it was just great. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, you got to be tactful about stuff like that. But I don't know. There are some people that just don't get dark humor, and they think, you know, oh, if you laugh at this kind of thing, that you are either maybe sympathizing with a group like that, or that you're agreeing with, like, you know, something like, I don't know, another, you know, the Coen brothers do dark humor amazing, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, Fargo, Big Lebowski, all that. But you know, watching Fargo and just, you know, people being thrown through the wood chipper and all this kind of stuff like that, and laughing at that. But again, you're laughing at that absurdity of what's going on. But it doesn't mean that you would agree with something.
You're on their side, or exactly.
Yeah. So it's just So, but but then there are people that just, I don't know, they just don't quite get it. That, you know, just like they don't get the nuance, or they don't get just kind of. But you know, I don't know.
Well, I mean, with the Taika Waititi thing, like with Jojo Rabbit, a lot of it does come with context, because a lot of that backlash and outrage was like they just saw an image, or they just saw a poster. They didn't see the movie.
Right.
And when you actually see the movie, when you dive deep into it, Jojo Rabbit or whatever gets backlash, you get a better context of what's going on there, and it's not what you perceived, or not what you were ready to have pitchforks and torches for.
Exactly. Yeah.
I tend to think that that tends to happen in most scenarios where people are banning comics. Like it's like rarely are they actually reading the comics they banned, you know?
Oh yeah.
I mean, most recently, like there was like people trying to ban Mouse, and reading the statements they were saying at like this school board meeting where they're trying to get this literally banned from the district. It's like they're like, there's some nudity in this book, and it's like, have you read this book? It's not the kind of book where somebody's going to be like, oh, cool, nudity. Like, no, it's not that kind of nudity. It's like, Or you know, it kind of reminded me of like rejection letters you read of Mouse, like in MetaMouse, where it's like, you know, publishers who'd be like, oh, I don't know if like, have you thought of like, you know, doing a cuter story with cats and mice? And you're like, I don't know if you read it or understood the point. So I think that actually brings up one of the things that I love about dark humor. And by the way, when you were talking about your comic having punching Nazis, that makes me want to buy your comic.
Oh yeah.
But
and for those that are in the pitchfork and torch thing towards me, if you are, spoiler alert for Gallows Man the miniseries, the Nazis get their comeuppance. Shocking, yes. I know.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that it sounds like it's going back to like the Nazis, I hate these guys kind of thing from Indiana Jones, which is where we should be as a culture with that.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is like with taking on like a dark subject and dark humor, that and the talking of like banning and stuff like that, or people not reading, is part of the fun or the draw, like why you choose to do this. Or write in that genre, to kind of poke that bear a little bit, because that bear is annoying. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. Because I feel like, I'm sure Scott and maybe Corey can chime in on this too, but it's like, I think we've all probably had a desire to at some point delve into writing like dark humor. for me, it's like the part of me that also likes listening to like punk rock and like kind of enjoys a little bit of a middle finger to people. And I think half of the fun of dark humor is it really is made for people who get it, and people who don't usually completely don't get it. Like, there's rarely like a middle of the road of people who are like kind of like lukewarm about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is there an appeal? Like, have you always written dark humor? Is this your first time doing that? Or
like ultimately when I started writing a lot more as a hobby, like 5-6 years ago, I was mostly writing horror, and I was writing horror comics and stuff, and eventually those will see the light of day. But yeah, I had some dark humor with some of those horror comics because horror comedy is it's a good thing when it's done well. Not saying I did it well. I'm not trying to like boost my ego or anything like that up, but good horror comedies like Tucker and Dale versus Evil or whatever, like you get the great horror aspects, you get the great comedic aspects, and it is dark. You can, there's dark comedic moments within movies like that. But yeah, I guess thinking about it, maybe a tiny bit. When I started writing The Gallows Man, I wasn't like trying to do like a rebellious thing against anyone. Like, yeah, like let's see the reviewers or whoever, let's see them try to talk about this or whatever. But there has to be an element within that, subconsciously or whatever, to where I mean, you kind of have to have that whenever you do send it off to a reviewer or someone to review it or check it out or whatever, and then you get turned down for that reason. Like, they didn't read it, they read, they flipped through the pages, or they looked at the cover, or they heard the name and they were like, nope. And so you do kind of have to have a little bit of that, like, yeah, like punk rockness a little bit, if that stuff isn't going to bother you. Because if you don't really have that a little bit of that punk rock mentality or whatever, every time you get a rejection or whatever, it's just going to keep punching you and weighing you down.
Yeah, and also you might be a little too safe with the writing, right? Where it's like, I think if you're too concerned, and I think this goes for any storytelling, right? Like, if you get too concerned about like the audience, I mean, you always want to consider the audience, but if you get too concerned about the audience, you can risk like making a really inauthentic thing.
Oh,
and
yeah,
like
it completely warps the story.
Yeah, and there's nothing people can sense more than like a really artificial, inauthentic thing, you know? So that's cool. So like with the Gallows Men, I'm trying to think, like, how did this, so you said you wrote horror, and that stuff's down the pipe. It sounds like you have an interest in the darkness. What's the interest?
Somewhat. I think it's just like, whether for good or bad, growing up, my parents, they're great parents. They didn't, at ages like 7 or 6 or whatever, they didn't let me watch like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or anything like that. But I had an uncle who didn't really care about that. And so me and my cousins, we would probably go there like once a month. And the one I remember the most, I remember seeing Wrong Turn 3. And that was, even at my age, I was like, what is this? I remember being like 9 or 10 years old, going to his house, and my cousin, who was like 13 or 14, she was huge into horror and stuff. And me and my brother, we were like these innocent kids, like, oh, what is this? We just know like PG-13 horror. We know Goosebumps or whatever. And she rented Saw 3. Saw no other Saw movie before that. Watched Saw 3. And for better or for worse, I think at least that experience and other experiences definitely affected me a little bit.
it's funny. I love hearing about these stories of people being brought up and how they came into horror or whatever. Because like it was like because I would go to party. You know, my parents they'd let me watch some stuff, but you know, I'd go to certain parties where they were like it would be like Friday the 13th, and it was just like, oh, we don't care, I'll watch whatever. But it was funny. My parents were weird because, and I think this is more of an American thing because in Europe and other places this isn't the case. But so my dad, he would take movies and he'd edit out certain parts before he showed it. Like he'd have like 2 dual cassette record, VHS, and he would actually take the time to edit certain parts out, but he would never really edit out any of the violence. He would just edit out the nudity. That was it. So violence, it's fine because he would like Conan. He did that. He edited out all the nudity in Conan, but the parts where the heads are getting lopped off, he kept it in.
That very much is an American thing.
Yeah,
it was like so nudity, big no. Even if you're showing like it's not even like sexualized. Like there's a difference between like naked and being nude. Like this is someone vulnerable and this is someone trying to be sexy or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, it's so weird to see that in America, at least, of like any type of nudity, big no. But hey, we can get away with a decent bit of violence in even some PG-13 movies.
Yeah, you can show somebody get their head blown off and it still doesn't get an R rating, but the second you show like a nipple, like it's like it's the end. It is kind of a weird, uniquely like American kind of thing, like our preference for violence over anything else. Yeah. And
I'm not trying to like constantly promote or bolster the Gallows Man, but with the Gallows Man, ultimately it is a fun time. Like it's a fun comic. There's a lot going on in the world. You can just have fun with this. A little break from reality a little bit. But if you want to read into it or anything, maybe there is like a little satire or social commentary on how we're desensitized to violence and gore because like the whole world of the Gallows Man, town city, the city is in, it's not just Gallows Man and his team, but like kind of everyone is just like, everyone's like, oh, good day, citizen. Very like cartoony 1940s people, but they still act that way even if someone like gets thrown off a roof or whatever by the Gallows Man. Like basically how little kids look up to Spider-Man today. You'll have a 6-year-old look up to Gallows Man who's murdered a ton of people, and they're just like, I want to be like Gallows Man one day. Like kind of direction.
I think that's why Fargo works so well, because you take this ultra violent, series of murders that's going on. You put it with the most polite people in the world and just how they react to it. Oh, yeah, he was a good guy and all this stuff. It's just like, oh, it's a shame. These guys had blown off. So I mean, I think that's what kind of made that work. So it's very similar to what you're doing with Gallows Man. So So I have a question. So when in coming up with the idea and the character and everything, did it factor in at all? Because we're talking the subject of dark humor, black comedy. Another term for that is gallows humor. So did that factor into coming up with the idea for Gallows Man, or is that just a coincidence?
That is a very good coincidence. I'm now going to have to take that little nugget and then disperse it to people and be like, yes, of course. I meant for it to be that way.
Yeah, of course.
Push up my glasses like, of course, yeah.
So what kind of sparked the idea? I mean, I'm always interested in kind of the creation of a character, where that spark came from, or I mean, obviously you were kind of inspired by the pop culture surrounding the 60s Batman and stuff, but what is the character specifically, this character who's kind of like that Batman, but then on the other hand, he's stringing people up, So I mean, what's kind of the impetus of the character? What made you kind of settle on that idea specifically for that character?
It's a bit of like 1960s Batman. It's also a bit of like kind of a culmination and an amalgamation of a lot of Golden Age characters.
Mhm.
Like the campy goofiness is very Silver Age. That's very
Right.
Silver Age. But Golden Age, like I ultimately hate what the comics code did and how much
Right, well,
it limited and censored. But I will say I do understand in theory what they were trying to do. They just ultimately had this crazy regime on it. They went way, way, way too far. But with the Golden Age stuff, you had like these sometimes somewhat dark books. Like you have a superhero or whoever, a detective or whatever, shooting people or killing people and stuff. And you have little 6-year-old Johnny pick it up and skimming through it and is like, oh, Mom, like, look at that. So I do kind of get the start of it. Overall, hate how it led down. But that is kind of like incorporating of like that violence. It is very like golden agey, lack of a better term, golden agey, where you have this character who is killing these people or is like beating them half to death. And then even within these Golden Age comics, like they're not trying to be comedic or anything. You do have like a little kid be like, man, Mom, like that guy's so awesome. I want to be like him. And then like you fast forward to today and you kind of look at that, you're like, whoa, that is interesting that was kind of the landscape. And so, yeah, you have 1960s Adam West Batman influence. You had the influence of kind of that Golden Age period, not only with comics, but just the time. And then ultimately with the silliness and absurdity of like Silver Age comics within it, kind of.
So did the character specifically though, was that just because, you know, basically the whole idea of the executioner and going back to that look? I mean, I'm specifically the guy with the hood.
Oh, yeah.
And that.
Well, ultimately, and that kind of plays into it is like the guy's name is the Gallows Man.
Yeah, it is
like we're looking
it.
up to this guy that literally has like a name that is like Death Man or whatever. Yeah. Like we're looking up to him, especially in this setting. All the town city, you have radio folk, like 1940s radio folk, like the Gallows Man. Thank goodness he's here to save the day, folks. It's amazing he's here, like that sort of stuff. But yeah, it is like with his character, it was ultimately like, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to have it to where like everyone is okay with this guy killing people for justice,
right?
Whatever you want to say with that, whatever it may be, he needs to have that extra level, that extra step of that name. Like he can't just be like Good Man.
Yeah,
that's trying not to say the S Man. You can't just be like Good Man, but Gallows Man, like that's like whoa. But in that world, it's like, like,
yeah, it is funny because you just picture this. Yeah, he saved the day, and he murdered these people and everything, and then in that same town, you know, they're making their pies and they're putting them out on this windowsill, and it's like, oh, it's just a lovely day, you know.
Exactly. So, you have this Batman and Robin essentially of Gallows Man and his little 10 to 13-year-old sidekick Nooseboy, and everyone's like, man, I just love these guys.
And that's kind of, in a way, that's sort of a commentary on the whole idea of taking a kid off the street and put, okay, you're gonna fight crime with me now. I'm gonna put on this costume and risk your life against fighting these,
And like I kind of dived into that a little bit in issue 2. There's like a 2-page little comic at the very end. It's not a part of the main story, but it's a little like, it's very manga inspired. How like you'll read a chapter of manga and then they'll have like 1 or 2 like little random stuff showing what characters were doing a long time ago or whatever.
Yeah,
And
if it's a Naruto, then it's like 5 to 6 episodes worth of filler about ramen visits. Yeah.
Yeah. But like with that, it was essentially like, let's look at how Newsboy's doing. And that 2-page comic is, oh, you see him in his house, you see his mom, and his mom's like tucking him into bed, and he's sleeping. His bed is like a coffin, like an open coffin. He's sleeping in that, and there's little details. You can look around his room in the panels, and there's like jars of like stuff, like there's a frog in a jar, and there's like all kinds of stuff, and also playing into that absurdity of how do these people not know that this person is that superhero. I mean, he has a poster of a noose like behind his bed, as well as he goes to sleep in the Newsboy costume. And so his mom is like, or also he's going to bed at like 4 p.m. Because keep in mind, superheroes, you start doing superhero stuff around midnight. So the mom's like, it's weird. You always get home from school and then go straight to bed. It's wild. It's still sun out. And then she's like, and you always wear that Newsboy costume whenever you go to bed. If I didn't know any better, I realize you're a big fan of him. But if I didn't know any better, I would think you were Newsboy. And then show his reaction of like, I could never be as awesome or as cool or as strong as a Newsboy. No way. Then the mom's like, yeah, I guess you're right. And then Newsboy's like, wait a second.
Yeah,
but then
it's the whole thing. Like, it's funny how Clark, you're never around when Superman's around.
Exactly.
And, and just, but it's just, but it's taking that again to the absurd level.
I kind of like that it has because I mean, people could draw like an analogy to like, stuff like Invincible or what's the other one that just came out through
The Boys?
Yeah, The Boys.
Yeah.
Like a kind of Grant Morrison thing. But I think like the thing that I like about what you're doing with a similar premise, but I like the twist of the fact that like no one around, like in the Grant Morrison version or whatever, it's very much like a reality version. Invincible, similar thing where it's like, okay, if we took this like kind of crazy premise and we just took it very literally and put it in a real world, like how would people really react? I like that you're like, no, we're keeping with the premise for like everybody, but the results are very real. So it's I think that's hilarious because I love the idea of the reaction still being the little kid who's just like, thanks, Spider-Man. And it's like Spider-Man's just annihilated a villain. Like
Spider-Man has like a chunk of someone's like flesh on him. Like,
I think that's really funny. That is a good you have my interest just from that alone. That's a good angle to take. And also, do you like kind of writing in that old timey kind of is it written in kind of that old radio program kind of way where it's like,
very much. I mean,
you did the I guess Kickstarter video kind of has that news reporter type,
nice,
intro
like news on the march.
That
kind of thing.
Like, I literally hired a guy who can do a 1940s radio announcer voice to do the Kickstarter trailer and stuff.
Ooh,
so
exciting.
Like, and that's its own thing with like that trailer, those trailers, because that's the second one, 150 views maybe. And I put so much effort into it, but it's ultimately for me. Like the trailer itself is like another piece of art similar to like the comic being a piece of art.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where just looking at both of those trailers, it'll stick with me because I get a lot of joy out of just watching those trailers every now and then, because like at the end of both of them, because I have this 1940s radio voice guy, I hired him to do this, and they usually go by every 50 words. So I've got like 49 more words. I'm not just going to spoil those. I'm not going to let those go to waste. So I talk with my buddy. I'm like, hey, what is some absurd stuff? Don't no language or anything. What's some absurd stuff you would like a 1940s radio voice announcer to say? And so we write up a script, and basically at the end of each trailer, get him to say stuff like, what are you talking about, Willis? Or me meow, moo meow, I am a cow. And like music peaked with the creation of ska, like just the most random stuff to get this guy to say, and he's willing to. That's what's great about it.
I love it. That's hilarious.
That's great. It's kind of like what we were trying to do with the super chat, where we would read whatever you put in the super chat. If you give us some money,
which we're still doing. I just wanted to throw out
Josh,
there.
I gave Josh a super chat telling he had to say that his favorite band was Nickelback, and if he ever said anything to the contrary, he was lying.
And I read it because I will read anything that's not disparaging of other groups of people for super chats. And I will just remind the chat that that offer still stands. Just
It'll be on my channel too, so I get a little. Oh, so okay, so is there anything else that we wanted to mention before we start wrapping things up, Brandon? I mean, I think we gave everyone a definite glimpse into what the comic's about. Gallows Man, definitely want to check out the Kickstarter. There's a link in the description. But I don't know, is there anything as far as dark humor or just comics in general that you wanted to touch on that we didn't get a chance to?
Ultimately, it'd be good to see more dark humor or dark comedy, or you could also say comedic books, like a mix of both within. It's mostly indie is all you're seeing. Like yes, the big two do have some, but like you have to dig and search for those.
Yeah.
Like all of the comic YouTube channels I watch don't talk about this book. I haven't read it, but it piques my interest. Star Squadron is like a current DC book that's going on, and it's basically Heroes for Hire, like the Marvel Heroes for Hire, but for DC. And you have characters like Power Girl and Red Tornado, basically like getting paid to do like cameos, like the celebrity thing, like, hey, what's up? It's me, Power Girl. Or like going to a kid's birthday party and stuff, like scraping by to get money. Stuff like that's funny. Superior Foes of Spider-Man, like the humor that Nick Spencer plays with those like C or D list villains, like I'd like to see more of that stuff when it comes to our big comics. Like overall, I love drama. I love seriousness. I do love darkness within stories, but like, let's have some variety with the comics that you see on the shelves. I think there's not enough comedic books or dark comedy books on the shelves. They are out there, but you have to dig for it. You have to really look for it.
Yeah, a good example, sort of. I mean, where we, you kind of take something serious and add that comedic quality to it, but you can also do it in reverse. A perfect example of that is like where you mentioned some of these absurd D-list characters, and Batman has a lot of these in his rogues gallery, and what they did with superhero or Suicide Squad with like Polka Dot Man, the most ridiculous character you could think of, but they made James Gunn made it work within it was actually like he made it work, and it was great. I love that character.
Oh yeah.
So I mean there's, and that's the kind of stuff that people talk about because it's different, and and unfortunately it's still, I don't know, here a lot of the mainstream stuff in the States, it still is sort of that same, it's very much superhero centric, but even if you want to do a superhero comic, there's just so many ways you could take it. I mean, even if you look at, Marvel's doing a little bit of this with their cinematic universe, as far as they'll take a character, but then they'll put a sort of a different spin. Like, okay, we're going to do superheroes, but we're going to do a rom-com, or we're going to do superheroes, but we're going to do, a sort of a quasi horror, or we're going to do a spy, thriller or whatever. So, and maybe that's, that could be definitely happening within the comics as well. I'm not too familiar with what's going on in modern mainstream comics, but it's still, when you look to like either Japan or Europe or whatever, where the spectrum of genre and everything is just so broad and we do see that in indie comics, but I'd like the mainstream to kind of tackle some of that stuff too. So,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I would say like there is mainstream doing that, but the mainstream is leaving a lot of the comic stores behind, because it's getting like where you're gonna see more variety like that is gonna be in like young adult sections and like bookstores,
yeah.
or where it's like, I mean, like Dog Man. I always harp on Dog Man. I think it's one of the best comics out there. My son like absolutely adores it, and it got him into comics, and it's by all means like a comic, and it's humor, and it's like you have kids like one of the most popular kids books right now is like a humor comic. So like that kid's gonna grow older. We need to have stuff like this is why the mainstream should catch on to that. Like we need to have stuff to like catch those kids as they get older, right? Like they're gonna get older, they're gonna want some Monty Python. Where's the Monty Python in comics?
Well, also, I think the mainstream also needs to cater towards. They're not really catering towards younger kids.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't. You've got to bring new audiences in. I mean, they do have lines and everything. Marvel does have lines where, and the stuff that they are publishing through, like the young adult stuff that Marvel does. I've seen. In my local comic shop, there's a kids section, and to me, I'm looking at this stuff, and this looks like some of the best stuff here. It looks super fun, But it is like Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and just a lot of those characters, but towards that audience. So they're doing a little bit of it, but I think they could definitely do more, because it's kind of like they're the comic. As far as mainstream goes, the age group is getting older and older, and they're just kind of following along with that. But I think they really need to make an effort to bring in.
Agreed. Yeah, like bring in the new, and then also have enough to provide for those new as they get older, right? Like, I think that also this is a plug for Brandon and supporting indie comics. Like, you guys should support Brandon's Kickstarter. It also starts with the audience, right? Because like Mad Magazine got rebooted recently, and then like not enough people bought it, so it kind of just fell apart. And it's like, it's kind of a bummer that we are in a world without like really good Mad Magazine. Bring humor back to comics, like support humor in comics, like support Brandon, support other people making funny comics. I think that's where it starts. It starts with you guys watching.
Marvel, bring back Star Comics. Okay, so before we close out, then you brought up a question, and maybe we can all. I mean, we already know Brandon's answer to this question, but you had asked if Corey and I had ever thought of doing like a dark comedy comic. I mean, mine definitely has horrific elements to it, and there's comic elements, but it's by no means a dark comedy. Young and the Dead, but
it's kind of a dark comedy for younger kids, I think.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there could be. I mean, when I think dark comedy, I think sort of what Brandon's doing with Gallows Man, or and Tarantino or Coen Brothers, stuff like that. But I could definitely do that. And even I don't know. I was thinking of Gary's book, because he's got a lot of Tarantino vibes. I don't know if there's. I mean, the absurdity. I don't know if I would call DBSM dark comedy, but it definitely has that absurdity. That the concept itself sounds like a comedy. Sounds like it should be played for fun, but it's serious. So there's so many kind of different offshoots or different ways you can look at things or categorize things. But I don't know. What about you, Corey? Any interest in that type of? I mean, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff you do has definitely some horrific elements to it, and you. So yeah, I mean, I'm probably answering that for you, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I need to do dark comedy. I just like to point out, things that are happening. We have like a billionaire who crashed a satellite into the moon and owns like the electric car market that is trying to buy like one of the major social media networks, basically to let somebody who caused an insurrection in the Capitol back onto a platform where people can listen to him. You just kind of say that. That's pretty dark and weird that everybody is cool with that. And, so I don't know.
Yeah. I love the Werner Herzog-esque answer of like, Why do we need dark comedy? The world is a dark comedy. We live in dark comedy.
I've tried.
Cool.
I've
Yeah.
tried to do comedy, and I feel like every time I try to do comedy, it just ends up really sad. Like people are like, "Yes, that is depressing." I'm like, "Oh, I was trying to make a joke," but yeah,
It's such a fine line. Like I noticed this back when I was being hired by, this is like years ago, for like this comedy collective that I really miss. It was called The Devastator, and they did like a whole bunch of like just hilarious like Mad Magazine-esque like short comics. And I remember asking the editors, because they'd hire like comedians, and then for some reason they'd like run my stuff, and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm that funny. And like the weird thing is, all the comedians that were involved in it were like kind of into what I was doing. And I found out that like we have this like, because I do like this auto-bio kind of slice of life, like depressing stuff, and then they do humor. It's like there's a very thin line.
yeah,
And what I found, like talking to a lot of the comedians who wrote for it and stuff, was that like a lot of them are like super into like, you know, Charlie Kaufman movies and like all this like heavy existential stuff. And meanwhile, like I'm like super into like stand up and comedy and like Monty Python. And it's like I feel like like Corey, just to kind of back what you're saying about your own work, it's like I feel like there is like a realm where comedy and tragedy are like very close.
Corey
And
could
it's a
easily
fun
tell
line
an
to
auto
straddle.
bio about all his near-death experiences, and he could be a great.
I think he should. I think he should do one.
yeah.
What? I
It'd
think
be a pretty thick book.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I
that
don't know how-
like sadness and like depressing stuff can play into the humor. Like sometimes you can look at the humor and then
Yeah.
like you look a little bit further, like, oh, that's kind of sad. Like I'm not trying to like spoil anything for another comic or anything, but I've had this idea. I don't know what comic I'll ever put it in, whether it's a future Gallows Man thing or just some other book. But the idea, it's going to sound bad, but stay with me, a park for the blind, where what I mean by this is it's like a little public park where blind people can go. This ultimately came from like trying to think of a comedic Daredevil script story,
Right.
where they can go, but the park itself, because the people are so like money tight and are like, oh, they're blind, they'll never notice. The park is in disarray. There's garbage everywhere. There's little things like, so it doesn't smell bad because they have a sense of smell. They have little like those pine tree air fresheners hanging around the park, so they can't tell from that. There's comedic elements that can come from that. There's also like, this is really sad that a city would do this. Like there can be that sadness and humor there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that goes for like auto-bio stuff too, where it's like even in like you know, a comic I wrote about like depression and like mental illness, it's like I still make fun of myself within it a lot. So there's like a lot of levity within it, where it's like I think if you're too heavy-handed or not even honest, like I find that people sometimes go too far with drama, where they forget that like as Corey was saying at the top, like half of how we all get through really crazy things in life is humor. And even at our darkest points in life, like even when people are in like the pit of depression, they still tend to have a sense of humor, right? And so if you're writing about that and you just suck all the humor out of it, it just I think it risks that thing of like inauthenticity.
Yeah.
And you know, I think one of the things that's great, and by the way, Corey, your short animations are very funny, but it's like I think that's one of the beauties of like humor, and why I feel bonded to it. Like, and what I tend to make is like I feel like there's a real connection where it's like if you're not touching on a truth, it's not going to be funny. And if you're not, you know, and if you're too heavy on truth without humor, then you're not really telling truth, right? So I don't know. It's a cool juxtaposition.
I'll tell you one of the funniest things I did last year. So, right after right after the accident and before I had the surgery to put in all the titanium, I was still on oxygen and I got a meeting invite on my phone. And so I went and I thought it was hilarious. And so I couldn't get dressed like I normally have to wear like a shirt and tie to work. So I like pulled over like a really stretchy polo shirt, which is about all I could wear for about 6 months. And I dragged my oxygen tank to the 3rd floor of that building to go to this meeting.
Oh, it was an in-person meeting. I thought you meant just on Zoom.
I thought it was Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was awesome how uncomfortable everybody was. And my
Did you just
bosses-
give him like a dead stare too, Corey? Just like as if like nothing.
No, like I just,
Were they like insistent that was it kind of like a situation where they're insistent that you be there and didn't really
No,
understand?
not at all. They were all trying to convince me to go home the entire time. And my point was, if I don't have to go to this meeting, why does this meeting exist?
Oh, yeah.
And I said that. My boss's boss's boss was like, Corey, you should, I'm kind of surprised you're here. I was like, well, I got a meeting invite, And
Oh my gosh, Corey, that's amazing. See, that needs to be a comic.
What would be funny is if you like didn't address like anything, like the
Yeah.
accident or anything. You're just like, everyone's like, Corey, why are you here? And you're just staying with that. You're just like, I'm here for the meeting. They're like, no. Like your state's like, what are you talking about?
yeah, got a meeting invite, so I'm here. Like I was still on the list, right? Anyway,
I love it.
That's
they
great.
had catering still made my dinner for that meeting, so I still had food. So nobody expected me to come except they still paid for the meal to show. Anyway, I just thought it was funny. I thought at the time it's gonna be really funny. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go to this meeting. I know for a fact that no one wants me there because nobody wants to look at my collarbone trying to work its way out of my skin, which is what I was doing at the time. Is it was like tenting up, and my arm is like 3 inches closer to my neck than it should be. I was like, but I'm gonna do it. This is gonna be hilarious. Anyway, so yeah, I just really like making people uncomfortable. I think I don't know if that's humor, but it's funny to tell the stories like
I'm laughing.
I think that's I think that wraps it pretty nicely, like back to like dark humor, because I think that's half the fun of dark humor is like there's something a little uncomfortable about dark humor, and it's kind of funny. It's funnier when it's uncomfortable,
Yeah, it's those situations where you're like, maybe I shouldn't be laughing at this, but it's funny. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, okay, sorry, I can't help but bring this up. One of my favorite dark comedy bits ever. Anytime we talk comedy, I'm going to bring up Monty Python because I think that was like, I think my whole life I like thought some things were kind of funny, and then when I was introduced to Python, it was like this is the amalgamation of like everything that's my sensibility of humor. And so that's like the first time I like really connected with humor. Like I didn't just laugh. I just felt like they get me. They get my humor. But anyhow, there's this bit where there's a mailman, and he comes to this house. Not a mailman, milkman comes to the house to deliver milk, and it just turns into like a steamy, made for TV romance, like pseudo pornographic, but they can't really show anything kind of movie. So it's like this lady opens the door and is like, oh, well, why don't you put the milk in the house? And she's kind of like revealing a little bit of like she's in a scantily clad costume. So it starts playing this romantic music. The milkman's kind of looking around. He's like, okay, I guess I'll go in this house. So she leads him up the stairs to her bedroom, like shows her leg. He's kind of looking around, like getting more and more excited. She opens her bedroom door, lets him in, and then shuts the door, locks it. And he's like, kind of tries to open the door, turns around, and there's just a bunch of dead milkmen. And then it just says the room
Is that
was
where the
full
band
of
got the
milkmen.
name? Is that where the band got the name?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I did not know. I haven't seen that bit. That's fine.
But that's like a classic kind of just dark humor, but great,
Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna have to see if I can seek that one out.
Yeah, it's good too. Palin plays the guy uncomfortably kind of looking around, being like, am I getting away with this? It's so good.
All right, guys, let's wrap it up. So let's see. Where should we start off? Let's start. Well, we'll start with Brandon. Brandon, again, the link. Everyone, check out the Gallows Man's live on Kickstarter right now.
Yeah, how's it going? Is it like are you getting funding? So far?
It's going good. I honestly expected it to go a little bit better, just based off of how the first one did last year. I do obviously see us getting funded. A lot of people are backing it and stuff, but it's a little slower than I thought it'd be initially.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you guys heard it. Like, go out there and back it, make this thing happen, and even if it does get funded, let's get it well funded.
Yeah, I mean,
give it a shot.
So you know what it's about. If you're into dark humor, if you're into, the concept alone with the with sort of this 60s Batman style with throwing the ultra violence, I love it. That's one of those things where I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have thought of doing that.
Yeah.
So definitely check it out. There's a link in the description, and but anyway, if you want to let people know where they can find you and everything on social media. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, so you can track the how the Gallows Man is going and making that and stuff on Dismay Comics on Facebook and Instagram. That's DISMAY Comics. I need to spell that out because it sounds like the mouse. It sounds like his corporation if you say it too fast or differently. Yeah, I'm thankful for everyone that showed the support. I'm thankful for being on this show. And yeah, go to that Kickstarter page. I've got a ton of preview pages because each issue has like 49 pages of story, like just story. Then there's extra stuff. So it's over double sized issues. So you get a lot of bang for your buck there. Again, there's reward tiers ranging from $1 to $70, whatever works within your budget. And yeah, just a good humor time. There's 7 preview pages of issue 1 and 7 preview pages of issue 2 on that Kickstarter page. So you get a really good feel of it. And I also talk about some stuff. You can watch the trailer. And if you do all that and you still don't like it, then it's probably not for you. But if you do all that and you do like it, maybe give it a shot.
Definitely. Yeah. All right. Corey, where can everyone find you?
You can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And there's animations and comics and weird illustrations.
Okay. All right. Josh.
All right. You can get my depressing autobiographical graphic novel that has a little bit of dark humor in it, that talks about dealing with depression and suicidal ideation and like really heavy topics, but with a little bit of levity. 2 stories. You can purchase that now on Amazon. And then my graphic novel, Jacob's Apartment, kind of done in, it's more of a slice of life coming of age story in the vein of Ghost World or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And that you can pre-order right now before it comes out in June through your local bookstore. The best way to do it is go into a physical shop and say, order this book because it's carried through Diamond. And so I want to take advantage of that and make sure I make more comics carried by Diamond. So go ask your local store to carry this book. Graphic Mundi is putting out a lot of cool stuff.
Awesome.
Scott, how do people keep track of this show after you let everybody know where we find your stuff?
Yeah, I will let people know. But first of all, like I said earlier in the show, Free Comic Book Day. No matter where you are, go out to support your local comic book store. Go and get some free comics, and while you're there, purchase some comics. Find some stuff you like. It's if you've never been to Free Comic Book Day, it's awesome. If you happen to be in Arizona and want to go to Free Comic Book Day, go to Surprise Comics. That's where I'll be, in Surprise, Arizona. I'll be there signing. I'll be doing sketches and remarks and all kinds of stuff like that. So stop in, say hi, get some comics, and hopefully I will see you guys. Other than that, you can find my stuff at circworks.com. You can find other videos and everything if you want to. My Making Comics 101 series is here on YouTube. Also, I do a lot of just art inspiration and advice for artists, and a lot of it specifically for comic creators. So definitely check that stuff out here on this channel. This show that we do, the Artcasters, we do every single week, usually without fail. And it's usually on a Thursday night like tonight. Sometimes it can be on a different night. It rotates between Josh's channel and my channel and Corey's channel. So if you want to know whose channel we're going to be on, who the guest is, what the topic is, all that stuff, YouTube doesn't always notify you. So the easiest way to know that is just join our mailing list, and we don't spam you or anything. All we do is about 30 minutes before we go live, at least, we'll send out a newsletter, and it'll give you all that information so you know exactly where to go so you can catch us live. And speaking of live, I just wanted to thank again everyone in the chat. I know we didn't pull up too many of you guys' stuff, but we do appreciate you being in there, and we hope to see you here next week. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.